Hi, I'm Mark Goldberg, and I'd like to thank you, the members of the Annapolis Camera Club, for inviting me to speak about wedding photography and video. I'm speaking to you electronically because physically I'm now on the West Coast for about a 3-week assignment, but I'm very appreciative of the privilege to talk to you, and that's why I chose to do it this way. By the way, this is my paper teleprompter instead of an electronic one. I began with a hobby in photography and filmmaking. My father was involved in the advertising business, so I had an exposure to photographs and television production. And at about 5 years old, I got my first camera. When I was 13, I was given a motion picture camera, 8mm format, as a present, and I took movies of family events. I took up the filmmaking hobby again in 1976 in the Super 8 format, and in January of '78 I got my first business account, and that was with the W.R. Grayson Company, and it was based on a personal contact with the advertising manager. He was my professor for a course over at the community college in business, and when I decided to go to the business side of filmmaking and asked him for some advice, he said, "You know, we have a need for somebody to edit some sound film for one of our product sales areas. Can you help us?" And that was my first assignment. I did my first wedding photographs and Super 8 sound film in 1979, and it was for a friend on a cost reimbursement basis. In 1981, the club manager at the USNA Officers and Faculty Club had a client who wanted a wedding video. She knew I was involved in filmmaking and referred the client to me. As a result, I went and rented some video gear, and there was my first paying wedding assignment. 1984, I took my first paid wedding photographs. Client came to me and said, "You know, we've seen a lot of wedding photographs around in the DC area, but we're after something different." When I told them that I had never photographed a wedding before for pay, they said, "Well, you know, that's the greatest asset you have. We're looking for something that is not just a carbon copy of all the other photographs." In 1985, I studied with Monty Zucker, who's well known particularly in the areas of wedding portraiture. My business grew. In 1987, I studied with Dennis Rengie, who's well known for his wedding photojournalism approach. I would characterize my work today as wedding, video, and photo verite, and that is the video or the photography of truth. I'm also a writer in the field of wedding video. For Wedding Photographers International, I write for their monthly Wedding Photographer newsletter with a video views column. I write articles in the Rangefinder professional photography magazine on the subject of video, and likewise for Maryland Reflections, a monthly newsletter of the MPPA. I'm proud to say that this April I'll be a featured speaker at WPI's Wedding of the Year to be in April in Orlando, and I'll be working with 3 other photographers to demonstrate wedding video techniques. You know, the biggest difference between the professional wedding photographer or the hobbyist or amateur wedding photographer is the business side. There may be a lot of similarities between what both people are doing, but the one area of important difference is the business side. Money entering the picture. There's promotion, there's accounting, and there's insurance, customer relations, taxes, on and on and on. You may have as much space devoted to storing your files as to negative storage, so that becomes a very big consideration. You also find that your time is very limited, and you have to use your time and your resources to best advantage. So I've set up a few principles of my own business philosophy because I realize that I have a certain niche that I'm serving, I have certain personal strengths, and I can't be all things to all people. So here's how I work. First of all, I give a high level of personal service. I'm the photographer for the wedding family or the wedding couple that doesn't want to be just one of the 200 weddings that a particular studio is doing, where they want to know that I'm the only wedding, that theirs is the only wedding that I'm doing that day, perhaps that weekend, and that they're not on the clock or they're not on the meter. I like to foster an attitude of unconventionality and openness to suggestions, even suggestions from the client. You know, that many of my most successful ideas in the business of photography and video really originated with clients. So I'm not afraid to try something new. You know, the customers are really interested in that. They can see a lot of albums. In fact, one told me, it looks like they've lined up a bunch of cardboards of people in their wedding clothes, and that the different wedding parties just stood in front of the cardboards for the same stock pictures. Well, I got a little tired of that, and I believe my clients are tired of that also. I believe in upfront pricing. You ever go try to buy a car? You see it advertised at one price, you go in and you find that to get the wheels and a steering column and a spare tire, you need to pay quite a bit more. Well, I've got a problem with that, and I have a problem in dealing that way with my customers. So I think they should know at the time they contract pretty much what their wedding photography is going to cost, even extending out to parent albums. So even if they book for the primary album, I'll say, well, you can expect to spend perhaps another $200 or $300 per family for smaller parent albums or loose enlargements or other products that we offer. I also evaluate assignments in terms of what they will give back to me for the time and the expenses that I will invest. And I found that for the same cost, it's easier to serve the higher paying clients than the lower paying ones. In fact, the higher paying clients tend to be more cooperative, they provide nicer circumstances in which to work, and they're very appreciative of what you're trying to do. So that's my personal choice. And again, finally, there are certain personal strengths that I have, certain talents that I have, others that I don't have. So I choose to serve the particular niche that I do well. And I hope that that will help me to achieve more success in the future as I develop an even greater following. So I'm going to talk to you next about the kind of wedding photography and video that I do. It's not the only way to do wedding photography and video. It's my way. But perhaps by looking at how I do things, you'll be able to find your way. Photo verite, the photography of truth. Best way I can illustrate photo verite is, think about this. Suppose you published a magazine called Sports in Maryland, and you decided to hire me to go and to photograph the Super Bowl. So you pay for my first class ticket, perhaps several hundred rolls of film, the rental on some expensive gear, other expenses. You send me down to New Orleans to cover the excitement of the Super Bowl, and you say, Mark, bring us back some really dynamic shots so that our readers have a feeling of what that Super Bowl was about. So I go ahead and make the trip, shoot up 100 rolls of film. A few days later I'm back. You pay a lab overtime to develop and print my photographs. And I say, well, Mr. Editor, what do you think of this? Well, there's the first shot. And there's a quarterback, Joe Montana, and he's standing in a profile in an empty stadium. He's gazing off into the distance, and he's holding a football. You say, well, okay, but where's the Super Bowl? I say, hey, take a look at this. And then the next one is Elway, and he's kind of gazing at a Super Bowl ring like this. He's also in profile. He's perfectly posed. The light goes across his face, and you can see the other eyelash, but not the eyeball, to keep the judges happy. And then you see several of the coaches standing slightly out of focus in the background. You say, wait a minute, where is the Super Bowl? You say, wait till you see this one. And it's the head cheerleader. She's got her pom-poms on her hips, and then all the other cheerleaders are in front of her, and they've got their pom-poms forming a circle, which makes a nice vignette for the head cheerleader. You say, wait a minute, I sent you there to get the Super Bowl. Well, at least did you get the team when they won the game? Did you get them spraying each other with champagne in the locker room? You say, oh, no. Well, actually, we had to delay that because we had to take the teams outside behind the stadium and line them up for team shots. Well, look at this. They're all perfectly lined up. One knee's on the helmet and the other elbow's on the knee, and there's the coaches on the end. What's the first thing you'd say to me? You're fired? Yes, that's exactly what you'd say. But you know that's how we've been doing wedding photography for years? I found a shrinking interest in that type of an approach, in totally studio-style background portraiture for weddings. Although I am capable of doing it, I'm finding a higher and higher percentage to other styles. An expanding interest in natural, spontaneous photographs. I asked potential clients, what do you like and dislike about the wedding photographs you've seen? Have you been to weddings that have been photographed? What did you like or dislike about what the photographer did? The number one objection was, we think it's rude when the photographer is interrupting people all through the day, calling for their smiles, and it's especially rude when he keeps the guests waiting and holds the wedding party, the bride and groom and their families, up in the church for a long series of poses. I can't agree more. Yes, I do take the wedding party and the bride and groom in the church, but with natural lighting during their real ceremony as opposed to an artificial lineup on the altar. To do photo verite, or later on video verite, pre-production planning is essential. The wedding day is not the time to ask who's who. You also need a rapid response approach. I use the 6x6 2¼ square format with 220 film. I always keep a second magazine on my belt. For reception or pre-wedding journalistic photographs, I like to use a motor drive. For wedding ceremony photographs, the motor drive makes too much noise, and I therefore use a manually advanced camera. I then take that same camera and set it up through the rest of the day to do another kind of photograph I call scene setters. As far as equipment is concerned, I use the Bronica SQA SQAM system. The lens and add vignetting. My favorite lens is the 40mm wide angle. In the area, and I asked his advice about wide angles. He said, don't buy the 40mm, it's much too wide and it tends to distort the shots. Well, I immediately went out to buy the 40. I got many great results with it, and as a matter of fact, sample prints made with this lens have yielded tens of thousands of dollars in referrals for me, so I'm very pleased with what the lens can do. and it's my second most used lens. My lighting comes from a Metz 60 series. It's a very powerful flash. I also have some Nikons and a Vivitar flash as simple on-camera battery units. For group poses and portraits, I use a 400 watt second Portamaster with softbox, but still my primary setup is the Metz and occasionally the Vivitar as a second light. To avoid the harshness of direct flash, I have two different kinds of bounce systems. One is a folded white plastic card which just softens the light from the Metz, and the other is the same kind of folded white card but with holes in it so that some of the light, or in fact most of the light, goes to the ceiling and provides overall fill, and about 20% of it is sent forward onto the subjects. And I found that for a single flash that produces the most flattering light. Types of films. My old reliable is good old VPS. It's sold at ASA 160. I rated it ASA 100 because in my experience you need that extra little push to get a good exposure, especially for good color printing. I also use VPL, which is a long exposure tungsten balanced film for church interiors and for my scene setters under tungsten light. New kid on the block is VPH, ASA 400 Vericolor. That's fine for wedding receptions, fast breaking action, in particular with very high ceilings where my bounce system tends not to work as well. It's also very useful for outdoor wedding receptions toward the end of the day. Then I get into a strange situation where for natural photographs I have to have the shutter speed too slow to stop the action, yet a single flash on camera outside without any walls to bounce tends to yield very harsh image. So the ASA 400 VPS is really very valuable in that situation, or for other rapid fire type of events where you need a little extra power on your flash or a little extra throw. I do about 200 to 300 shots per average wedding, and I term an average wedding as one having anywhere from 50 to 150 guests. There are other factors in the wedding that do determine my film usage, but to give you an example, I recently did a wedding with about 45 people in attendance. There was no band. The reception was about 3 hours long. We started before the ceremony and then had a luncheon buffet thereafter, and I showed 160 essentially different images from that type of a wedding. So photojournalism is great for Eastman Kodak. I'd like to review the different kinds of photographs I do. First of all, a scene setter is something taken by existing light. My 40 millimeter wide angle is very useful here. The place of the reception, any kind of an overall shot showing locale, displays of food, and that type of thing. Next, I call environmental casual portraiture, and those are nice photographs of the in wedding attire. Then comes studio. Studio style portraiture while guests are waiting at the reception. It either has to be done before the wedding, on the same day, or on a prior day. Group photographs, a standard part of any wedding. The bride and groom and their families want to see who's there. This includes my informal table photographs, a quick grouping of I'm going to get some traditional photographs too, but I believe I can get them in as quick a time, in as short a time as possible. It takes me only 90 seconds to do a group photograph. Finally is my favorite, and I call that journalism. In terms of photojournalism and not portraiture.
The ring on Ginger's left hand, repeat the vow of the ring. This ring I give thee.
This ring I give thee.
In token and pledge.
In token and pledge.
Of our constant faith.
Of our constant faith.
And abiding love.
And our abiding love.
With this ring.
With this ring.
I thee wed.
I thee wed.
And with all my earthly goods.
And with all my earthly goods.
I thee endow.
I thee endow.
What token do you give as a symbol of your affection and of your sincerity and fidelity?
This ring.
Will you receive this ring as a token of Ginger's affection, sincerity, and fidelity? And will you wear it as a symbol of your own affection, sincerity, and fidelity toward her?
I will.
Replace the ring on Michael's left hand. Repeat the vow of the ring. This ring I give thee.
This ring I give thee.
In token and in pledge.
In token and in pledge.
Of our constant faith.
Of our constant faith.
And abiding love.
And abiding love.
With this ring.
With this ring.
I thee wed.
I thee wed.
And with all my earthly goods.
And with all my worldly goods.
I thee endow.
I thee endow.
Wedding video, a big growth area, some consider it a novelty. My approach, like photographs, I call it cinema verite, with an occasional background interview with the bride and groom or their families. Low profile, low light equipment is a must. I don't want to create Hollywood on the Severn. I want to let the wedding happen and capture the reality. Turning it into a sports event or a Hollywood production, I believe, destroys the atmosphere of a wedding. Unlike photography, however, video requires a continuous level of ambient illumination. A photographer uses a short, intense burst of light from a flash. If you were exposed to that level constantly, you'd find it quite bothersome. In fact, you'd probably have eye damage. But video requires a continuous level. Sound is also a major consideration. Video, unlike photography, is subject to many restrictive rules from churches and synagogues. These rules control the movement and placement of the camera and have a big impact on the production. Extensive research is absolutely essential because you're capturing the real events and you have absolutely no opportunity to pose. When the wedding is over, I spend an average of 20 to 40 hours in post-production editing, adding titles, putting on any music. So it's a very time-consuming process, considerably more than with wedding photography. I'm finding a growing influence of computers and high-technology systems. Video titling, management of the editing process. More and more, to be video literate, you must be computer literate. To cover a wedding ceremony, I use two cameras, one at the back of the church and one at the front to capture the faces. In some lower budget weddings, I will have only one camera. Well, I've heard of high budget weddings. I haven't done them quite this way. I've heard of 4, 5, or even 6 cameras used simultaneously. It's my personal opinion that video in the marketplace will be to the 90s what personal computers have been in the 70s and 80s. In the future, I believe that the dominant wedding memory medium will be electronic and not silver-based photographic. In fact, stills will one day be generated from video imagery or perhaps a higher technology successor to the current videotape, maybe recordable compact disc. Who knows? Video is really where my heart is. My goals for business expansion involve even more serious work in video in the business and as well as the special events market. There are some problems facing all videographers, among them technological turnover, why you just about pay off your system in 2 years or more and you have to buy a new one. How would you charge for wedding photographs if you had to buy an entirely new Hasselblad system every 2 years. Well, that's a challenge facing videographers, so you can forget that tape is cheaper than film fallacy. Our biggest competitors are non-professionals. That is the uncle or the cousin or the friend who's just bought a new camcorder and is going to do a great job on the wedding. It's unfortunate that the real losers here are the wedding clients themselves, who find out a week later that they have their friends or their uncle's perspective on the wedding and not the reality of what the wedding day was all about. Our biggest problem is underpricing, undervaluation of our own work, and a lack of a handle on our own costs. I believe that wedding video should be every bit as expensive as wedding photographs, perhaps even have a higher price, because wedding video brings to the surface a lot more technical skills than does photography. There's the sound, there's the editing, there's the research, there's the equipment maintenance, there's all these things and more, plus the directing of real action. So I believe one day video will aspire to this place. I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you, and I would like to wish you the best for success in your efforts, and hope that you're able to find the fulfillment and the room for expansion and personal growth in your photographic endeavors the way I have found those things in mine, and to wish you all the best.
Can you join my